The barn smelled of sweat, hay, and fear, the kind of smell that settled deep in a man's bones. And when rancher Colton Hayes pushed open the wide wooden doors with his lantern raised, the sight before him froze him in place. A woman sat bound to a post, her wrists raw from the coarse rope, her hair falling in damp strands over her pale face, and her eyes, dark, wide, haunted, found his and pleaded before her lips even parted. "Don't cut me loose," she whispered, her voice no stronger than the rustle of dry leaves. "I'm just bait." The words hit Colton harder than a bullet, and his hand, which had already drawn the knife from his belt, trembled in the air. Bait. The word clawed at him with all the weight of a trap waiting to spring. He scanned the shadows, the rafters, every inch of the barn beyond the dim circle of his lantern, and his gut told him what his mind already knew. Someone had left her here, not out of mercy, but malice, the kind of malice that drew good men, close so they could be broken. Still, the rope cut into her skin, her breathing came shallow, and Colton's heart warred with his head. He knelt, his lantern casting his scarred face in flickering gold, and murmured, "You're not bait to me, miss. You're a human being, and no trap's gonna stop me doing what's right." The knife bit into the rope with a single slice, the strands falling loose like dead snakes, and when he pulled her free, she collapsed against him, her whole body shaking. For a moment Colton thought it was from weakness, but then he heard it too. The faint creak of wood above, the shift of boots on beams, the metallic click of a rifle being cocked. His blood ran cold. The trap had already been sprung. The gunshot cracked the silence like lightning splitting the night, wood splinters exploding from the beam inches above Colton's head, and instinct took over before fear had time to sink. Its claws. He dragged the woman down into the dirt with him, shielding her body with his own, as a second shot rang out, shattering the lantern and throwing the barn into darkness thick as tar. The smell of smoke and old hay filled his lungs as he pressed her close, whispering low and steady, "Stay with me, miss. Don't you move till I say." Her breath was ragged against his chest, but she clung to his coat like it was the only solid thing in the world, and when he shifted to peer through the blackness, he caught the faintest outline of shadows moving high in the rafters. 2, maybe 3 men, armed and hunting. His jaw tightened. So it was true. She hadn't lied. She had been left here as bait, and now he was the prey. Slowly, Colton's hand slipped to the revolver at his side, the weight of the iron steadying him. But he knew bullets alone wouldn't save them. Not trapped in a barn, not outnumbered. He needed a way out. "Can you run?" he whispered against her ear. She shook her head weakly, her voice barely audible. Not far. He didn't have the luxury of far. He shifted, scanning the barn, and his eyes caught the faintest glow of moonlight bleeding through the wide crack of the back door. A chance. Just one. "Then we don't run far," he murmured. His heart pounded, every sense alive as boots scraped overhead, men laughing low, certain of their trap. He tightened his arm around her, breathed once to steady himself, and then, in a single burst of movement, he lifted her against him and lunged toward the back door. Gunfire roared behind them, bullets tearing into wood, sparks flying from metal. Her terrified cry muffled against his coat, and with one final shove of his shoulder, the barn door gave way, and they spilled into the night air, into the pale wash of moonlight and the freezing breath of freedom. But as Colton's boots hit the ground outside, he heard the pounding of hooves in the distance, the unmistakable sound of more men riding hard, and he realized the nightmare was only just beginning. The fire crackled low, throwing sparks into the cold night sky, its light carving fragile warmth into the shadows that pressed close around them. And for the first time since cutting her loose, Colton allowed himself to breathe. The woman, Ilara, as she'd finally whispered when he asked her name, sat wrapped in his duster, her eyes fixed on the flames, though her thoughts were far away, lost in some darker place the light couldn't quite reach. She hadn't spoken since they escaped the barn, since the gunfire and the chase through the open fields, since he'd fired back blind into the night just to buy them a few seconds of mercy. But now, with the silence so heavy it seemed the stars themselves leaned down to listen. She drew in a breath and whispered words that chilled him more than the cold wind ever could. "You don't understand, Rancher. They weren't after me. They were after you." Colton froze, his hand tightening around the iron at his hip as he stared at her, the truth unraveling in her voice like barbed wire. "I was the lure. They know you fight for people who can't fight for themselves, that you'd never leave a woman tied in the dark. They used me because they knew you'd come." Her words sank deep, and though anger stirred in him, it wasn't for her. It was for the faceless men who had turned kindness into weakness, who had twisted humanity into a trap. Still, the question pressed like a knife against his throat. "And you?" he asked quietly, his voice low and steady. "Why go along with it?" Alara's eyes finally lifted to his, wet and haunted, and in them he saw the truth before she spoke it. "Because they said if I didn't, they'd kill my brother." The crack of firewood filled the silence that followed, sharp and cruel, and Colton felt the weight of the road ahead settle heavy on his shoulders. He wasn't just fighting for his own life anymore, or even hers. He was fighting for someone he hadn't met, someone who mattered enough that she'd risk damnation to save. Slowly, Colton reached out, placing a rough, calloused hand over hers, steady and certain, his voice carrying the kind of promise a man could only make once in his life. "Then we'll get him back, together." And as the fire burned low and the night grew colder, a fragile hope took root in the ashes of fear, the kind that no enemy could snuff out.